If you'll permit me, I want to take us back to kind of a difficult time in our recent history. Whenever this whole COVID pandemic started, and I know there's a lot of feelings about a lot of parts of this whole experience, one of the sad realities was that churches were closed on top of everything else. And what I experienced when I was in campus ministry, just 6 or 7 months into doing such a thing, maybe 8 months. And what I experienced on my end was a lack of connection to the students I'd been ministering to. And what I experienced on the other end of everybody I met was this deep longing to get back to the sacraments. That I had a lot of people who just said this was something I took for granted, that I could go to Mass, that I could receive communion, that I could do all sorts of things, had all sorts of freedoms, and then in a fell swoop, it was all taken away because of this virus and the fear around it. And for 3 years, we've been in a period of fasting, if you will, from the blood of Christ in particular, because of fear, because of the desire to not spread contagion. And this weekend, for the first time in our diocese in 3 years, we can now receive from the chalice again. And so for some people here, this may be the first time that that's ever happened, even though you made your first communion 3 or 4 years ago. It's worth remembering moments of pain like that so that we can appreciate the gifts that we've been given. Think about the first reading, for instance. Everything talking about the time in the desert, basically preparing the chosen people for the promised land. And year after year, through the series of feasts that they would celebrate, the Israelites, that they continue to celebrate, the Jewish people, they remember the things that the Lord has done for them. They remember a time when they had not, and they are grateful for the time that they have. That was, I think, the biggest grace of the whole COVID experience in my mind. That something good was taken away, and it could afford us the opportunity to appreciate how desperately we needed it and continue to need it. Sometimes it can, as we celebrate Mass, as we go through the routine of life, it just becomes so commonplace. We forget that what happens on the altar, what we're celebrating today's feast day in particular, is Jesus Christ becomes bread and wine. It looks like bread and wine, but it's actually his flesh and blood. And he actually wants to feed us with his very self. And like the gospel says, unless you do this, you have no life within you. That's why it was so devastating that we were cut off from the sacramental life of the church during COVID. So friends, as we get to celebrate in particular this great mystery, the fact that we can sacramentally participate in both species again, although Jesus is contained in the entirety of either one, if you receive just from the chalice or just from the body of Christ, it's all the total Christ, just as in the second reading, it talked about the one loaf being unified. There's something about the symbol of getting to receive both that hopefully deepens our experience and our appreciation of the gift that Jesus has given us of himself. And so I hope that as we, again, begin this practice, we can appreciate the gifts of God, the times when we didn't have, and now we can celebrate with greater joy of what we do have.